All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We've got another great topic for you today, all thanks to the awesome stuff you guys keep sending our way. And of course, that's what we do here. Dive deep, break it down, and pull out the most important insights for you.
Yeah. And today, well, it's something I think everyone can relate to. You know that feeling when you're trying to learn something new and it's just, well, it feels like your brain is overflowing with information.
Oh, totally. Information overload central.
Right,
Rough.
exactly. So we're going to explore that feeling, that experience. We'll look at how much mental effort learning takes the cognitive load and how we manage our own learning process, what's called self-regulated learning.
And we're not just making this up as we go along. We've got some serious brain power backing us up. Our main source is this article, Synthesizing Cognitive Load and Self-Regulation Theory, plus a bunch of related research, all from the Educational Psychology Review. Pretty heavy stuff, but we'll make it fun, I promise.
Oh, absolutely. So why should you care about all of this? Well, think about it. We live in a world where information is everywhere, right? Articles, videos, social media, it never stops.
It's like trying to drink from a fire hose sometimes.
Yeah, a fire hose blasting information straight at your face. So knowing how to handle all that, how to learn effectively without feeling completely overwhelmed, that's a super valuable skill, you know?
It's like having a superpower almost, the power to learn anything without your brain melting down.
Exactly. And that's what this deep dive is all about, giving you that superpower.
We'll be looking at how we as learners keep track of how much effort we're putting in, how we adjust when things get too tough, or, surprisingly, maybe even too easy.
And get this, we'll even look at how the places where we learn, the actual learning environments, can be designed to help us manage all of this.
Yeah, so our mission today is pretty simple, to help you understand how these two ideas, cognitive load and self-regulated learning, how they work together so you can learn smarter, not just harder.
Work smarter, not harder. That's a
Yeah.
good motto, definitely. Now, let's dive into the first thing that I think everyone has experienced, that feeling we talked about, information overload.
Okay, let's unpack that.
So just the sheer amount of information that's available to us now, it's honestly kind of mind-blowing.
Mhm.
Thanks to the internet and all the technology, we have access to, well, practically everything.
We've come a long way from the days of encyclopedias and library card catalogs.
Oh, yeah, big time. And a researcher named Youngworth actually pointed this out a while back, like how the amount of information available has just exploded. But here's the thing. When you're trying to learn something new, you're not just dealing with the topic itself,
Right.
like the facts, the figures, the main ideas.
Okay, so that's the actual content, the stuff you're trying to get into your brain.
Right, and that's what's been called object-level processing.
Yeah.
But there's also this other layer, this meta-level processing, and that's you managing your own learning journey, you know?
Like figuring out the best way to learn something, right? Choosing what to focus on, how to study, are you actually getting it, all of that.
You got it. It's like you're the student and the teacher at the same time, constantly checking in on yourself. Am I doing this right? Is this making sense? All that good stuff.
It's a lot to juggle, for sure.
It really is. And dividing your mental energy, your brain power, effectively between those two levels, that's where things can get tricky.
So what are some examples of that? Like, how does this play out in real life?
Sure. Think about it this way. You sit down with a good old-fashioned textbook, right? Pretty straightforward, usually. Now compare that to trying to learn the same thing from a website with a ton of links and videos and pop-ups and who knows what else.
Oh, yeah. Good luck staying focused with all of that going on.
Exactly. And some researchers, Wong and his colleagues, they actually looked into this, like the difference in how we learn from these different kinds of materials. And it's not just about what you're learning, but also how you're learning it, right?
Yeah, totally. It's like you have to adapt your learning style on the fly.
Totally. And consider another example, like going to a live lecture where you can raise your hand, ask questions, get clarification from the instructor, versus trying to learn from a massive online course, a MOOC.
In an MOC, you're kind of on your own.
Right, to a large extent, yeah. So again, in both cases, you're not just passively absorbing information, you're also actively figuring out the best way to learn in that particular situation.
And it's not just the learning environment itself. I mean, let's be real, we're also constantly battling distractions these days.
Oh, tell me about it.
You know, trying not to check our phones every 5 minutes, maybe trying to multitask, even though we know that's usually a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, and research actually backs that up. Where Lodney and others found that multitasking usually makes us less effective, not more. But here's another interesting point. You know how sometimes you put in a ton of effort? You really feel like you're working hard, but you're not sure if it's actually sinking in.
Oh, yeah, that's the worst. Like, am I just spinning my wheels here?
Right? On the flip side, sometimes something that feels relatively easy can still lead to really good learning.
That's interesting. So the amount of effort we feel isn't always a reliable indicator of how much we're actually learning.
Yeah, it's not a perfect one-to-one relationship. And that's why being able to accurately monitor how much effort you're putting in is so important, you know.
So how do we do that? How do we get better at recognizing whether our effort is actually paying off?
Well, that's where this framework comes in, the Effort Monitoring and Regulation Framework. It's called EMR for short.
EMR. Okay, got it. And what's so special about this framework?
So two researchers, De Bruin and Van Marienboer, they developed this framework to try and bring together cognitive load theory and self-regulated learning theory to give you a clearer picture of how it all works.
So connecting the mental effort with how we manage our own learning.
Exactly. And the framework, it basically shows how your meta level, that self-monitoring and adjusting we talked about, how it interacts with the actual learning task, the object level.
Mhm.
And right at the heart of all this is cognitive load, the amount of mental effort your brain's using at any given time.
Okay, I think I'm starting to see the picture here. So you've got the thing you're trying to learn, the task, and then you've got you, the learner, constantly checking in. Am I getting this? Should I try something different? And cognitive load, that's like the energy fueling both of those things.
Oh, got it. Like the fuel gauge on your learning journey.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
But we need to manage that fuel wisely.
definitely. Now, the framework also points out that effort isn't the only thing we use to judge our learning.
There are other factors involved, right?
Right. How easily the information comes to us, the fluency, or how familiar it seems, those also play a role.
Mm-hmm.
Think about when you read a sentence and you read it again, and maybe even a third time. It starts to feel familiar, but do you actually understand it?
Good point. Familiarity can be deceiving.
It can be.
Yeah.
Plus, your own learning style, the type of task you're doing, the overall learning environment, all these things contribute to the process. So it's pretty complex with a lot of moving parts.
It's like a giant puzzle trying to figure out how we learn best.
It is. And the EMR framework, it leads to three big questions that researchers are trying to answer. The first one is, how do students actually monitor their effort?
Okay, so when you're sitting down to learn something new, what clues are you picking up on? What's telling you how much effort you're putting in and whether it's working?
Right. And that act of monitoring your effort, that's the entry point to that meta level, that thinking about thinking. It happens both while you're in the middle of a task and when you're looking back on your learning across different tasks. Yeah. And learners, they use different cues to judge their understanding. But here's the catch. These cues, they aren't always accurate.
So sometimes we can be misled by these cues.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And a researcher named Coriat, he pointed this out, how these cues we rely on, they're not foolproof. Like, remember that fluency bias we mentioned?
When something feels easy to read, we think we understand it.
Exactly. Theed and his colleagues, they really dug into that. You might breeze through a text, feel really good about it, but then later, you can't remember the key points or explain it in your own words.
So that feeling of ease, it can actually trip us up.
Yeah, it's like a false sense of security. And here's another interesting finding. Research has shown this negative relationship between how much mental effort you think you're using and how well you think you're learning.
Wait, really? So if I feel like I'm working hard, I might actually think I'm learning less.
That's what the research suggests, yeah. And it seems counterintuitive, right? You'd think more effort equals more learning.
Yeah, naturally.
But Bars and his colleagues, they found this pattern in their research. And there are a few possible explanations for this,
Like what? Why would we underestimate our learning when we're putting in the effort?
Well, one idea is that if something feels really, really difficult, you might start doubting your ability to understand it, even if you are making progress.
Ah, so it's like a confidence thing.
It could be, yeah. And Soderstrom and Bjork, they found that learning doesn't always lead to immediate improvements in performance. So you might be putting in the effort, and you're actually learning, but you don't see the results right away.
So you might get discouraged and think your effort is wasted, even though it's not.
Exactly. It's like planting a seed. It takes time to grow, even if you're giving it water and sunlight.
That's a good analogy. So we might be misinterpreting the effort we're putting in, but also that effort can come from different places, right?
Absolutely. Cognitive load theory, which Sweller and his colleagues really fleshed out, it talks about different types of load. There's intrinsic load, which is the inherent difficulty of the material itself. Like some topics are just naturally more complex than others.
Okay, so that's the baseline difficulty level. You can't really change that.
Right. Then there's extraneous load. And that's the extra mental effort caused by things like bad instructional design, distractions, anything that makes learning harder than it needs to be.
So that's the stuff that's adding unnecessary difficulty to the learning process.
Exactly. And then there's germane load. And this is the effortful thinking that actually leads to deep understanding, making connections, building those mental models.
So it's the good kind of effort, the kind that leads to real learning.
You got it. Now, here's the thing. It's not really clear if we, as learners, can actually tell these different types of load apart when we're monitoring our own effort. But just being aware of them, knowing that some difficulties might just be poorly designed materials, that can be helpful.
Yeah, it's like knowing that sometimes the problem isn't you, it's the way the information is presented.
Exactly. And on top of all of that, our own beliefs about effort, those play a role too.
Our mindset.
Yeah, like whether we see effort as a sign that something is important and worth sticking with, or if it just means it's too difficult for us. Loiserman and her colleagues did some really interesting research on this, how our beliefs about effort shape how we interpret those cues.
That makes sense. If you believe that effort is a good thing, a sign of progress, you're more likely to persevere when things get tough.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a key point about the research in this area. A lot of the past research on how we use these cues has been, well, kind of indirect.
Indirect, what do you mean?
So researchers would often try to guess what cues students were using based on how they performed on tasks or answered questions, like summarizing a text or completing a diagram. Feed and others, Van Loon and his colleagues, they did a lot of work like this.
So observing what you do and then trying to work backward to figure out what clues you must have been paying attention to.
Exactly. But the researchers in this special issue, they're saying we need to be more direct. They're suggesting we actually observe learners as they're learning or ask them directly, what cues are you noticing? What's standing out to you?
So getting inside their heads, so to speak.
Yeah, basically. And they also want to understand how the timing of these questions, even the way we phrase them, might influence the answers we get. Handel and Frische, they've done some work on this. So for you, the takeaway is that your perception of your own learning, it can be influenced by when and how you think about your effort.
That makes a lot of sense. If you ask someone how hard they worked on a frustrating task right after they've finished it, they might have a very different answer than if you ask them a day later after they've had some time to process it.
Exactly. And to add to that, Bars and his colleagues, they did a meta-analysis, which means they looked at the results from a bunch of different studies on this topic. And they found that overall, there's this negative correlation between mental effort and judgments of learning.
So confirming that pattern we talked about earlier.
Yeah, but they also found that this correlation, it's influenced by a couple of things. One is whether the learner is more focused on the task itself or on achieving a specific goal. And the other is the type of task.
Interesting. So how you approach learning and what you're actually trying to learn, those both play a role.
They do, and they found that the negative correlation was stronger for problem-solving tasks compared to things like reading or learning vocabulary.
So if you're wrestling with a tough problem, feeling like you're putting in a ton of effort, that might actually make you feel less confident about your progress.
That's a possible interpretation, yeah. It's like your brain is saying, whoa, this is hard. Maybe I'm not cut out for this.
But maybe that's just a sign that you're really engaging with the material, stretching your mental muscles.
It could be, yeah. It's important to be aware of that potential bias. Now, Scheider and his colleagues, they also looked at this whole question of how we measure mental effort.
Okay, so going beyond just asking people how hard they think they're working.
Exactly. They looked at different methods, like tracking eye movements, brain activity, even physiological responses like heart rate. And they found that these different measures, they don't always line up perfectly.
So what we think is happening in our brains isn't always a perfect reflection of what's actually happening.
And it seems that way, yeah. And they emphasize that we need more research to really understand how learners interpret these effort appraisals, what clues they're using to make those judgments.
So there's still a lot to uncover about this whole mental effort thing.
There is. Now, shifting gears a bit, let's move on to that second big question from the EMR framework. How do we regulate that effort?
Okay, so once we've got a sense of how much effort we're putting in, how do we actually adjust our approach?
Right, so we're talking about deciding when to push harder, when to take a break, when to try a different strategy, all of that.
Like being the coach of your own learning team?
I like that analogy. So Corriott and his colleagues, they talk about two main types of effort regulation. There's data-driven regulation, where you're adjusting based on your immediate experience with the task.
So if it feels too hard, I ease up a bit. If it feels too easy, I maybe challenge myself more.
Exactly. And then there's goal-driven regulation, where you have a specific outcome in mind and you're adjusting your effort to reach that goal.
Okay, so I have a target in mind, and I'm making sure I'm on track to hit it.
Exactly. And here's what's interesting. Your experience with a task can actually influence your goal-driven regulation. You might adjust your goals based on how easy or difficult the learning process turns out to be.
So it's not just about setting a goal and sticking to it no matter what. You can be flexible.
You can and often should be. Now, remember how we talked about how the relationship between effort and learning isn't always straightforward?
Yeah, sometimes more effort doesn't equal better results.
Right. So the challenge with regulating effort is that you don't always know if that extra push is going to pay off.
It's like, is this effort leading me to the top of the mountain, or am I just stuck on a treadmill going nowhere?
That's a great way to put it. Now, this brings us to this concept of desirable difficulties.
Desirable difficulties. Okay, that sounds kind of counterintuitive.
It does, right. You wouldn't think you'd want things to be difficult.
Yeah.
But York, he introduced this concept. And the idea is that certain learning conditions, things that require more effort and might not lead to immediate success, they can actually lead to stronger, longer-lasting learning.
So it's like short-term pain for long-term gain.
Exactly. Like, a classic example is testing yourself instead of just rereading your notes. Roediger and Karpike, they did a bunch of research on this.
So quizzing yourself is a desirable difficulty.
It can be, yeah. It feels harder. And you might not do as well on an immediate test, but you'll remember the information better in the long run.
So sometimes embracing that struggle is actually the best way to learn.
It can be, yeah. Now, the million-dollar question is, how do you, as a learner, know the difference between effort that's desirably difficult and effort that's just spinning your wheels?
Yeah, that's the key, isn't it?
It is. And researchers have been exploring ways to help students manage their effort towards these beneficial challenges. Like, there's this idea of guided self-management of cognitive load, which Rudendries and his colleagues have been looking at.
Okay, so it's about giving learners tools and strategies to manage their own cognitive load.
Exactly. And one way to do that is by providing specific instructions on how to approach a task. Like Sithole and others, they found that guiding students to reorganize text and diagrams to reduce distractions, that actually led to better learning.
So it's not just about throwing information at people, but also giving them ways to actively engage with it and structure their learning.
Exactly. Now, we still need more research to fully understand what cues people use to regulate their effort and how those relate to the cues they use for monitoring. But Carpenter and his colleagues, they found something interesting. They found that students often perceive retrieval practice, like those self-tests we talked about, they perceive those as more effortful than just restudying.
So even though we know they're more effective, they feel harder.
Yeah, and this can lead to people avoiding those strategies, especially for memory-based tasks. They also found that people often interpret high effort as a sign that they're not learning well.
So again, that disconnect between effort and learning.
Right, and it highlights the need to really emphasize that sometimes that extra mental push, it's actually a good thing. It means you're digging deeper, making those connections.
Yeah, it's like you have to retrain your brain to see effort as a positive signal, not a negative one.
Exactly. Now, Van Gogh and his colleagues, they've also been looking at the potential of training learners to make better choices about what tasks to focus on. They're looking at how past performance and effort invested can guide those choices, especially for problem solving.
So using data to inform your learning strategy, essentially.
Exactly. And Knuckles and his colleagues, they've done some really interesting work on writing to learn, showing how writing can actually solidify memories and help you monitor your own understanding.
Writing is a tool for both learning and metacognition.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about how we monitor effort, how we regulate it. Now let's tackle that third big question from the EMR framework. How do we design learning experiences to make all of this easier?
So how do we optimize the environment and the tasks to manage cognitive load during self-regulated learning?
Exactly. And we need to consider both the active learning phase and the phases that come after. Now, one key approach is to enhance the accuracy of that self-monitoring process.
Help people get a more realistic view of their progress.
Right. And one way to do that is to provide supports that might actually reduce the overall mental load.
Like scaffolding.
Exactly. So, for example, things like generating keywords as you learn or completing diagrams, those can be really helpful. De Bruin and others, and Van de Poel and his colleagues, they've found that these activities can improve learning.
And why is that?
Well, when you create these external representations of your understanding, you don't have to hold all that information in your working memory while you're also trying to judge how well you're understanding it. It frees up mental space.
It's like giving your brain some breathing room.
Exactly. And keeping a learning journal can also be helpful, as Nuffles and others and Roel and others have shown. It allows you to externalize your reflections, your thought process.
So getting it out of your head and onto paper.
Exactly. Now, we still need more research to fully understand how these design features affect cognitive load and how they support the way we distribute our mental effort over time.
Yeah, there are always more questions to answer.
Always. Now, here's another interesting question. What about expertise? As you become more knowledgeable in a subject, does it get easier to manage cognitive load?
Like, do experts have some kind of secret weapon?
Well, cognitive load theory suggests that as you gain expertise, the mental effort needed for self-regulation tends to decrease.
So practice makes perfect, in a way.
In a sense, yeah. And research by Handel and others, Hubner and others, Roll and others, and rhyme makers and others, it supports that idea. Training can improve your monitoring and task selection skills.
So becoming more aware of your own learning process.
Exactly. But here's the thing. We don't know for sure if this training actually reduces the cognitive load needed for those metacognitive processes. And we also don't know how well these skills transfer to completely different subjects.
So becoming an expert in one area doesn't necessarily make you a master learner in all areas.
That's what the research suggests so far, yeah. Now, another debate among researchers is how best to incorporate metacognitive prompts.
Those questions that get you thinking about your own thinking.
Exactly. Should we explicitly link those cues you generate, like keywords or diagram labels, to how well you're learning and what you should do next?
So making the connection between thinking about your thinking and actually changing your approach.
Right. And there are pros and cons to both sides. Making that connection explicit might help you use those cues more effectively. But it could also increase your cognitive load if you're spending too much time analyzing cues that aren't actually helpful.
So it's a balancing act for instructional designers.
It really is. Now, one approach that tries to optimize cognitive load is the Freiberg self-regulated journal writing approach, developed by Knuckles and his colleagues.
That's a mouthful.
It is, but it's a really interesting approach. They provide different types of support for self-regulated learning, like prompting deeper processing, explaining worked examples, adapting prompts and feedback based on your progress, and even addressing motivation.
So taking a holistic approach to supporting learners.
Exactly. Now, Idle and his colleagues, they found something interesting. Learners can sometimes compensate for poorly designed instruction by managing their own cognitive load.
So even if the material isn't great, you can still learn effectively if you put in the extra effort.
To some extent, yeah. But they also found that this extra effort might not be sustainable in the long run.
So you can only power through so much bad instruction before you burn out?
Right. And Wirth and his colleagues, they've proposed this interactive layers model of self-regulated learning. They suggest that some aspects of self-regulation can happen unconsciously without heavily loading your working memory.
So like an autopilot for learning, in a way.
In a sense, yeah. But most of the time, self-regulated learning is a conscious process involving different levels of processing, the content itself, your learning strategies, and your awareness of your own understanding.
So it's this complex interplay of conscious and unconscious processes all happening at the same time.
Exactly. And all this research has sparked some great discussions among the experts themselves.
So even the researchers are debating how best to understand all of this.
Absolutely. Seufert, in one of the discussion papers, she really emphasizes the importance of understanding how learners use effort as a cue and how that might lead to biases in their judgments of learning.
So going back to that idea that sometimes we misinterpret how much effort we're putting in.
Exactly. And she suggests that self-regulation effectiveness might follow an inverted U-shape in relation to task difficulty.
Meaning there's a sweet spot of challenge where self-regulation works best.
That's the idea, yeah. Too easy, and you might not be engaged enough. Too hard, and you might get overwhelmed.
So finding that Goldilocks zone of challenge.
Exactly. And she also argues that we need to look at how learners perceive effort in a more nuanced way, considering things like the different sources of cognitive load and even their perception of their own resources, like motivation and emotional state.
So it's not just about how hard you're working, but also how you feel about that work.
Absolutely. And Dunlosky and his colleagues, they also offer some important insights. They emphasize that mental effort itself isn't what causes learning.
It's the process, not just the effort.
Exactly. They argue that the specific things you do while learning, those are what lead to learning. And they highlight the challenge learners face because they often don't know the direct link between their effort and the learning outcomes.
So it's like we're working in the dark sometimes, not sure if our efforts are actually paying off.
In a sense, yeah. And they call for a more comprehensive theory that explains how the specific learning processes relate to perceived effort.
So a more complete picture of how effort and learning fit together.
Exactly.
Okay, this has been a seriously deep dive. I feel like we've explored every nook and cranny of cognitive load and self-regulated learning,
We've covered a lot of ground, that's for sure.
but I think it's been worth it. We've uncovered some really important insights. So, to sum it all up for you, the listener, the EMR framework, it highlights how crucial that connection is between how you experience and are aware of your learning effort and your ability to effectively manage it.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, creating learning environments and tasks that optimize cognitive load during self-regulated learning, that's essential for really understanding complex information and making it stick.
It's about learning smarter, not just harder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why this is so important for you. By understanding these principles, you can become a more strategic learner. You can recognize when that feeling of effort is a good thing, when it's a sign that you're challenging yourself and growing. And you can learn to adjust your learning strategies to avoid that feeling of overwhelm and to maximize your understanding.
So you're in control of your own learning journey.
You are.
Now, here's a final thought for you to chew on. Think back to a time when you were learning something new and it felt like a real struggle. Looking back now with all these insights we've discussed, were you accurately judging your progress? And how might you approach similar situations in the future now that you have a deeper understanding of what's happening in your brain when you learn?
Great questions to think about.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.